It's pretty great. All right, cool. We're gonna get started. Matthew, thanks for the chat. It's a quiet chat out there.
Anytime.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Gresco. Welcome to the Antibody, a quarantine reading series part of LitHub's virtual book channel. At the start of the year, running an online reading series was the furthest thing from my mind, and yet here we are. Tonight marks the 25th show since the Antibody launched in March, and so a big thank you to the audience members who have turned out for the live events month after month. And a big thanks to my friends at the Literary Hub, Johnny Diamond and Justin Alvarez in particular, for bringing the videos of these events to an even bigger audience on the virtual book channel. It's just been an honor to host writers from all genres, from all over the world, and at all different points in their careers, from emerging voices to established authors whose books are getting, who are gracing the many best of lists that we're seeing at this time of the year. I often say when asked to describe the series that it's an attempt to boost people's spirit during quarantine. And personally, I can't imagine what this year would have been like if I didn't have these bright moments of inspiration and literary. So thank you. I'm thrilled to be closing this run of shows with three brilliant writers tonight. Matthew Daddona is here, Hafizah Jeter is here, and Xiaolu Gua is here. And before we open ourselves to their words, I hope that you will join me in settling yourself in and getting cozy, and take a deep breath. Because physically, you're where you are, but right now we're in this shared virtual space together. And while we are, I ask that you please keep your microphone muted. We don't have a stage, but we have a mic, and we're going to honor the authors when they have it, as each author is going to read to us. And at the end of the event, there will be time for Q&A, so be ready for that. But the chat is public. And I know it's been quiet out there, but you can show your appreciation of the authors. And I ask, please show your appreciation of the authors often and enthusiastically. Our first reader of the evening is Matthew Daddona. Matthew is a writer and editor based in Brooklyn, New York. His fiction, poetry, and nonfiction have appeared in Outside, Fast Company, Uprocks, Amtrak's The National, Guernica, Tin House, Slice Magazine, Grammy.com, and other outlets. Matthew is also the recipient of an Academy of American Poets Prize for Poetry, and his flash fiction piece on shaft mining was a runner-up in the Blue Earth Review's 2017 fiction contest. Alongside two other multi-hyphenates, he co-hosts Kill Genre, a quarterly reading series in Manhattan's Greenwich Village. House of Sound is his debut collection of poetry, which he'll be reading from tonight. So please get those keys clicking and your fingers tapping, and give a warm welcome in the chat there to Matthew Daddona. Matthew, the microphone is yours.
All right. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody who is here today. It's nice seeing your faces. It's reminiscent of being at an actual live reading in Brooklyn and running into you guys. So it's nice to have that memory, and nice to meet some new faces today too. Shout out to my niece, Kylie, who's watching from Washington. Thank you, Kylie. Anyway, my collection, House of Sound, came out about 6 weeks ago. I'm going to read a couple poems from it, and I hope you enjoy. This one is called From Mom with Love on Your Birthday. Today, when I looked in the mirror and saw myself aging with you, I thought Earth wouldn't be enough to contain us both. But there it is, turning its constant light on, like the woman next door who doesn't sleep but lives in a period of wakefulness that your father calls desire. It is not at all like that woman, I tell him. The way her axis is always shifting from one place to the next, you are almost dreaming her alive. Sometimes it helps that the light turns off. Sometimes we should wait for the moon and be forced to choose between night and day. I want to make the moon my painting and string it along for the ride. This way, when I'm driving, I'd have two moons and one Earth. You could call me on my one phone and complain about the signal. Have we ever been so close as now? The fact that losing signal is possible. The Earth has one set of solutions for contact and the moon another. Your father has a theory that the woman never stops desiring, that all the world's light would be spent in her hands. I show him a picture of you, Matthew, where the moon bobs like a second head. Behind you, the trees sift in repose, plans lay weighted in your hands. It's the heaviness that gets me. Last night, the woman never came home and the light zapped at moths for hours. It's the waiting too. I think I might shut it off if only to feel assured. Do you feel okay? You are, right? I know you have so many cards and that every year is a birthday, but here's another, one more. That poem was inspired. I was living with a roommate at the time whose mom was very involved in his business at all times, and she would send him greeting cards at least once or twice or sometimes 3 times a week, and he would leave them out, and that was the title of the card. And I meant to write it about him, and then like all poetry, it's sort of like becomes about yourself or someone you know. So that's where that poem went. This one's called Snow in the Garden. By now, human touch is worth more than what we affix it to. But in the bathlight of the house next door, a man uses one hand to steal his wife a blow to her temple. And what then? They took him out through the garden where he noted it must have snowed, past bonsais to the gate grating the pavement, which caused a chain of events. Fresh snow, the occasional bird, a warmness. My wife makes tea when I get to thinking. Yeah, 3 times a week. She was definitely in the Hallmark business, or should have been. This poem is called Poem for Leaving. It's one of 2 longer poems in the collection that are written as kind of sister poems. One's called Poem for Leaving, one's called Poem for Returning. Is it the feeling you're 4,000 miles away and have left the oven on? Someone will notice 24 red roses awaiting their turn. Trust the neighbor's dog who bites dandelion heads clean off. I regret to inform you 10 more ferries will disembark today. 2 dawdling trains will come. The lighthouse will calm the fish that swim centrifugally to shore. This is the body of a poem as a dead man floats closer to its title, centripetally without a purpose. More than to safeguard your books, I want to galvanize the long-winded passages that flutter in your absence, busier than Joyce winning at pinball. I've never read Joyce. I don't deserve a bed, let alone a box of your books. If anything, you have left your window open, not your oven on. On the day of your departure, tourists came dosed in August rain to offer coffee with explicit instructions. Rain supplants the tears of a child who watches a bug land in his cereal, then leaves once the milk bowl of time spoils forever. The packing is never done. Your neighbor searches for dandelions, his dog buried near marigolds. Do you want a Siamese twin? Someone to ensure that nothing has happened? To be tied at the neck like stolen souvenirs of each other's worlds? Or do you want a distant relative? Someone to write the story of the one who got away? All right, I think I'll do 2 more. Do you have time for 2 more? All right, this one's called Timbles, and it's about cicadas, and I believe, I need a fact checker on this. I think timbrels are the part of a cicadas that make the noise, make that rhythmic noise that you hear. That shaking noise. Timbrels. The cordless phone is baseless. It rings and I don't answer it. I plan garden time instead. The phone spreads its wings, or like a bulbous plant proves itself to the wind. From out the trees, cicadas lift like porch dust, and from where I sit, I might just forget the sounds made from their abdomens, the ribbed membranes like offshoots of the flowers. I've forgotten these sounds all winter, but now they're back, and some tiny alarm circles below like a harbinger. Whenever the phone zings, I pretend the cicadas will answer and play back a memory 100 times over. No, I have not yet unloved. No, I have tried to bring you back. The cicadas pass a message through the leaves, their vowels cocooning and then cooing like ohms. I want their wings. I want their answer. All right. I was gonna end on a sad one. Not that I have happy poems, but I was trying to pick through them, find something redeeming. This one's about a deer, because hence the season. It's deer season. The shoot. In its first year on Earth, a fawn over red berries and thicket, blind to her pickaxes and pocket change, requiring even some love. Pricked on ears by brush and fur straps beating flax from its tail, the fawn moves, but not stealthily through the brier, obfuscating the course of freedom, seeing the river slide like a chute gush next to the highway. Maybe it's a beat of faith. Maybe it's a straight-eyed glance at neighboring whitetails that will set it off, will get the fawn to realize its plight. It sees the chute and, trusting in gravity, sets its shoulders against the wind, all nature, all history behind. This is about the highway passing over the chute the fawn cannot see because it has believed in sound as progress. Walls of sound spill like the river. When passing the barricade, the fawn thinks it hears engines crawling at glacial speeds to die by truck stops. While tonight, with attentive thoughts, I await news that she has arrived through sedge black woods safely on the road, not because I fear, not because I feel I should fear, but because whitetails have shown a similar curiosity for sound that should my wife veer off the road, I assume she has hit a patch of flax melting tactile patterns. I may hear the fawn flow out of the chute to dry in her headlights, unashamed as when newborn. It eyes her struggle with the metal above, all reservations aside. But history will remember the highway above the chute and its fragile remnants, like the dust of fawn tracks, like the invariable motor temple, like the regression of our fear. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me. Brian, thank you. You do amazing things for the writing community. So I'm indebted to you and your service. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much, Matthew. Thank you for that beautiful reading as well. Everyone, please give some love to Matthew there in the chat, please. And write some appreciation there. That was awesome. I'm going to leave for you here. Oh, thank you, Peter. I'm going to leave for you guys here a link out to a list I keep up on bookshop.org of our authors' books. Bookshop will direct your sale to the nearest independent bookstore, or if you don't have an independent bookstore nearby, they will funnel part of your sale to one. So please support our authors and support independent bookstores who need our help now more than ever. So you can find a link to purchase Matthew's collection, House of Sound, if you follow that. Thank you again, Matthew. That was awesome. Our next reader is Xiaolu Gua. Xiaolu was born in South China and moved to London in 2002. Her novels have been shortlisted for the Women's Prize and the Independent Foreign Fiction Prize, and longlisted for the Man Asian Literary Prize. Her memoir, 9 Continents, was awarded the National Book Critics Circle Award in autobiography. Her critically acclaimed films include She, a Chinese, and a documentary about London, Late at Night. Based in London and Berlin, Xiaolu is currently a visiting professor at Baruch College of the City University of New York, and she is joining us tonight from London, where she will be reading from her new novel, A Lover's Discourse. So please, everyone, get those fingers tapping and give a warm welcome in the chat there to Xiaolu. Xiaolu, you got it.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Very happy to be in the company of poets, after all. I'll be reading from my recent novel, A Lover's Discourse. So I'll be reading from the section called Wu Yu, and it's a Chinese phrase, Taoist or Zen Buddhist phrase, Wu Yu. And the novel is kind of simple. It's between man and woman, the dialogues between man and women. I wish I could write a poem like Matthew's. So there's kind of quick intensity, but without making of 300 pages long narrative, which is really a liberation for any writer. Anyway, so the novel is inspired from this French author called Roland Barthes and his 1970s book called Lovers Discourse Fragments. So it's really my kind of naive attempt to adopt some of his method in Barthes' book and a certain kind of psychological or linguistic exercise around man and women. So here's section 无语. There had been this feeling of 无语, wordlessness and a loss of language, which had enveloped me. It reminded me of something I read in one of Barthes' books, Empire of Science, and he described how he felt when he visited Japan, the strange signs and sounds, the miscommunication and the silence. The Japan of my world was London, and the strange signs and sounds were from Britain. In my flat, I had not spoken for some days. My flatmate had gone back to Italy, and for days, alone, in this enclosed place, I listened to the radio, and there seemed to be only two types of news, Brexit and sports. Neither could I connect to, nor could I participate. It is strange, but accurate, that English people use the word flat to describe a home. Flat, F-L-A-T. That is a sad concept for home. My flat did not feel like home at all. It was more like a space defined by legal status where I, as a foreigner, could cook and sleep legally. I owned nothing in this country. Come to think of it, I did not even own myself in this country. My visa, my non-existent income, or my supposed doctor's degree, none of this belonged to me, even though they might temporarily belong to me. Every morning I woke up with anxiety. I made a coffee with the espresso machine from my flatmate. I chewed anything edible in the kitchen and worked on my thesis till noon. One day, with an empty stomach and a doomed feeling about staying in England, I put some rice and water in the rice cooker and plugged it in. I locked the door and walked to Mare Street to get groceries. Each time I passed bus stop, there would be a few Jamaicans or West Indians speaking to each other loudly with their own particular accent. I could not quite follow what they said, and instead I stared at them like a cold metallic camera. Then there was an ambulance rushing down the road, its siren shrinking. It was so loud that it set off my tinnitus. And before I could escape from the horror of the open door life, a police car zoomed past with an even louder siren. Everything seemed to be sending out a message saying, go home, jobless people, go home, foreigners, and go home, losers. I walked back to my flat and I cooked some minced tofu. There was no soy sauce left, but I found a bottle of brown sauce. I opened it and sniffed, without knowing what was in it. I poured some onto my tofu. I thought the white bean curd needed some dark color. I tried a little. It tasted awful. I spat out the strange flavored tofu and studied the label on the bottle. It said that it was based on the famous Worcestershire sauce. But what was Worcestershire? A province in England? A raining place with some cows wandering around? Do the locals produce special herbs for brown sauce? Did this source distill the essence of the place? And would I ever visit there one day? In the afternoon, I read books related to my study. My throat was dry and I needed to go out. Perhaps I should talk to people, speak in some language, in any language, and hear the language of others too, any language. And in the evening, I was thinking about calling you, but I did not. I did not want to make you think that I was a needy person. I thought I should walk to the canal and to my lockkeeper's cottage, but I was a little afraid of dark. So instead, I wrote to you. Dear, I'm feeling wordless, and I call it 无语. And it's like I have lost my language. Then you wrote back, why lost? And if you have really lost one language, aren't you gaining another? I read your words a few times, and I thought, why can't I hold on to one language while gaining another at the same time? And why do I have to lose one first? I looked out into the dull night sky and I got no answer. Okay, I think that's the section I would just end. Thank you.
Thank you, Xiaolu. Oh, that was gorgeous. Everyone, please show Xiaolu some love there in the in the chat. Thank you so much. Oh, and there was a lot of poetry in that. I felt like this novel felt very appropriate to put alongside with poets. So yeah, absolutely beautiful. And the novel is A Lover's Discourse. I'm putting that link in there again to the list at Bookshop, which you can find it there along with the other books from the reading tonight. Yeah, so good, so good. All right, I've got some questions coming up. They're brewing in there. But first, we have one more reading. I'm really excited about this. Hafizah Jeter is here. Born in Zaire, apologies, Hafizah, if I'm mispronouncing that, Nigeria. Hafizah is a Nigerian-American poet, writer, editor, and agent. She received her BA in English and Economics from Clemson University and an MFA in Poetry from Columbia College, Chicago. Hafizah's poetry and prose have appeared in The New Yorker, Tin House, Boston Review, Long Reads, and the McSweeney's anthology Indelible in the Hippocampus, among other places. An agent at Janklow and Nesbitt, Hafizah serves on the planning committee for the Brooklyn Book Festival, very cool, and lives in Brooklyn, New York. Her debut poetry collection is Un-American. So please get those keys clicking and your fingers tapping and give a warm welcome there to Hafizah Jeter. Hafizah, you got it.
Thanks so much, Brian. The pledge. With dirt under her fingernails, our mother held our father's hands. The years marked, hoping one of his paintings would sell. The two of them always in search of auspices. Their daughters, their last blood. My sister and I, we were jackknives, a long division, splitting them continents wide. Seeds blown and planted. Zaria to Boston, black fruit of Akron winters. Africans hyphenated down to a promise. Cultivated inside the sunlit chains of our father's south. While our mother resurrected in the dark, her prayers are half grief, the spell of protection. She told us what he would not give us, we were forbidden to name. But Allah, like color staining a porcelain sink, I've lain with woman, our mother lost to myth. I am a test of how far a daughter's memory can go. Our father, a wilted shoot of wheat, wavering against the wind, never expected to age alone in his birth country. Our bondage stretches our ghosts in all directions, trying to outpick the rot. America has grown in our throats. The break-in. When I close my eyes, I see my mother running from one house to another, throwing her fist at neighbors' front doors, begging anyone to call the police. There are times when every spectator is hungry, times a thief takes nothing, leaves you a fool in your inventory, how one trespass could make all others suddenly visible. My mother counted her jewelry and called overseas. My father counted women, afraid one of us would go missing. When I close my eyes, I hear my mother saying, this new country. My cousins exclaiming, auntie, between the clicking line and their tongues. Tonight, the distance between me, my mother, and Nigeria is like a jaw splashed against a wall. I close my eyes and see my father sulking like a pile of ashes, his hair jet black and kinky, his silence entering 1,000 rooms, then outside trimming hedges as if home were a land just beyond the lawn, the leaves suddenly black. When I close my eyes, I see my mother, mean for the rest of the day, rawing my back in the tub like she's still doing dishes. How to bring your children to America. The mothers became targets, hanging on clotheslines, bibs of the barely fed, children, countries, born split in two, firstborns whose first steps aborted their sisters, brothers, the fresh bread of their love language, children, the English, tearing sphinxters in two. The mothers came by boat with wings, forgetting their own mothers' uteruses, singing praises to Allah. They came over and over again until it couldn't matter that so and so had died. We were the nicknames escaping their bellies, the translation between stay and never arrived. Husbands, uncles, we were wives. Illnesses, pawpaw seeds, only thing that could save them, sickle cells that knew better than to touch. Visible only in their dialect, they sent for cousins, wired money, forgave ancestors we couldn't trust. They stopped speaking to us in our birth language until we became new dictionaries, became the consonants of the Constitution they studied, our first words, forgotten artifacts in our home countries. They were the ones whose fathers had died in the melt of a language, without daughters. In America, we were memories without accents or consensus, lambs that couldn't be traded for milk, meal, or honey. The fact of our bodies in America, their new Quran. And oh, how they moaned, how they starved, sucking their teeth between King's English, yelling for us to stop playing immigrant and go get naturalized. I'm gonna read two more, thanks. The Widower. 5 winters in a row, my father knuckles the trunk of his backyard pine like he's testing a watermelon. He scolds smooth patches where bark won't grow, breaks branches to find them hollow. He inhales deeply and the pine tree has lost even its scent. My father, the backyard forest king, the humble king, the dragging his scepter through the darkness king, king who won't lay his tenderness down, trembles into the black, unable to stop his kingdom from dying. And this last poem is called Ida, which in Islam is a period of mourning, but one that is traditionally held by women. Ida. Only when the surgeon approaches does my father stop crying, his heart sputtering, spent. The anesthesia long begged for reprieve from being a layman in the morning rooms of woman. 6 weeks my mother's been gone, and the surgeon drags his fingers across my father's chest, explaining how 3 calf vessels can rescue the heart. Already gowned, my father listens ambivalently, 1,000 miles from those first nights where he lay side by side with his grown daughter in his wife's bed, the two of us desperate to keep the other breathing. In the morning, he washed dishes, I dried. Together, slowly domesticating our suffering, both unsure if his fatherhood could stand up to the light. From his hospital gurney, my father gazes at me as though staring across a fog-covered lake. We are twins afraid to be separated. Years later, when I think of my father, nurses wheeling him down that white corridor, the growing distance between us, making his body smaller, then smaller, I will recognize in us the rescuer's dilemma and the drowning man flailing out at sea. My desire to be the savior, then the choice, him or me. Thanks.
Damn, thank you, Hafizah. Thank you so much. I just want to sit with that for a moment. Thank you. That was such a what a reading to end the year on here. Thank you guys so much. We've got some time for some questions, and if you would like to ask a question, you can drop that into the chat. So please, if you've got some questions for anyone, let us know. I see a question from Peter here, which I actually want to kind of like, if you don't mind, Peter, I'm going to kind of like swing or add on to it, because the question of influence is so an interesting one. And Peter asks Hafizah specifically if Whitman is an influence, and if you could talk about some of the poets you like to read. So Hafizah, maybe you could start, but I'd love to hear a little bit just about influences from all y'all. Yeah, go for it.
So in terms of Whitman, no. You know, I grew up in, like, after we moved to the States when I was 3, I grew up in Akron, and then we later moved to Ohio when I was to South Carolina when I was 15. And so I kind of just grew up in towns where like there was like a Barnes and Noble and a Books a Million, and the poets were like the living poets were like Nikki Giovanni, and everyone else was dead, you know. Like and so my experience with poetry was really what my parents like brought in the house. Like growing up, my mom used to teach like African dance lessons from our house to like me and my sister and like her friends' kids, and she would make us memorize, we all had to memorize poems and like present them. And so like growing up, like we had to, you know, I was memorizing Langston Hughes, Gwendolyn Brooks, and like, you know, performing them for my parents' friends in very humiliating situations as a child. And so, you know, I think that like, you know, the beginning of my world of poetry really starts there. And, you know, because I kind of just like really, until I got to like to grad school for poetry, that's probably when I started reading contemporary poets, but also like, you know, going backwards in the canon. So most of, you know, up until that point, most of my influence was what I was, you know, reading in terms of like, you know, like just like novels. But like things that, you know, have really influenced me now, the work of Carl Phillips, I think it's just like perfection, you know. Like Carl Phillips, I think I like to say like he knows more about a single comma than I know about all the English language, you know. Like he's just like so brilliant. You know, I think like Don't Let Me Be Lonely was one of those like just pivotal books for me. Like Eduardo Corral's Guillotine is amazing. Kimon Felix's Build Yourself a Boat is amazing too. And then, you know, also the work of Sharon Olds has been just like really important to me, just in terms of like what she gives in like vulnerability. I just think is like amazing. Like love Marie Howe. So that's kind of like my influence are just kind of like all over the place.
Very cool.
Whitman, unfortunately, he didn't get this one.
And hey, other authors, if you guys want to like jump in at any point, like, or ask questions one another, feel free to do that. Xiaolu,
yes, I was looking at the chat I would like to respond to Peter's sort of question or comments. It's interesting because actually you are talking about two concepts in the Asian Chinese kind of expression. One is wu wei, which you wrote here. Wu wei is do nothing or non-doing. So it's kind of typical Zen Buddhist concept. Another word I used in this section I read is wu yu, meaning non-speaking. But it's very difficult to translate in a narrative form. So in my section, when I read wu yu, I translate it as speechless, wordlessness, and the loss of language. But they all sounds kind of negative. It's about loss. But you could translate, if you're in the Asiatic context, then you can translate something like non-speaking, or wu could be the sound of silence, which could be powerful and very positive. The difficulty of this kind of translation, because these are Asian words, and if you look at the Chinese ideograms, as if you understand immediately, if you learn, say, if you learn already 3 days of Chinese calligraphy, you immediately understand, it looks like that. Okay, yu is this, is a man, try to speak, or the speech is standing on the left side, beside a person. Then you really kind of immediately think, it's such a way to suggest an ability of a human being without ontological identity within, something, because the whole ontological anxiety from the West, especially from Christianity, is really suggests this ego, superego, and the identification between the identity and yourself, right? It's separate things. And all you need somehow is to capture that identity, and that eventually belongs to you, and you possess that. And if you write or try to use this East Asian concept, something from Zen or Buddhism, there's no such separation between the self and the person. It's a one thing. The final goal is that thing is to understand, lose all the attachment, which means they lose all sorts of constructed identity by non-speaking, non-doing. And this could be, sometimes sounds very strangely negative, but it could be just the utter freedom, utter space or utter silence for you to roam around your mind and your body. But in this section I read, there's certainly a kind of utter loneliness, and there's this extreme non-communication going on between her and her London life and the world around her. And I think if you're an Anglophone person, it's very difficult to imagine someone with this completely non-European linguistic tradition, because you could be a non-Anglophone person, but you can be French or German. You can more or less make out between these 26 letters by looking at or by the sound of it. But if you come from China or Japan, this ideogram system working around 20,000 characters and 40,000 characters, it is this imagerism in your speech, but that cannot be immediately represented. So, and also China as this communist regime or post-communist regime, we were cut off since 50s from the whole world. So I remember the first time when I heard a Western man called Elvis Presley in my 20s, I couldn't understand, who is he? Who is Elvis Presley? And later on they were telling me someone in East Germany, they didn't know this, all these phenomena at all. If you mention, say, Walt Whitman, what is it? It's a man or something, it's just so alien to us when you live in this completely ideologically isolated space. And I think that was my feeling when I came to England after China. This no speaking. And even I was speaking, I spoke this strange language which had no reference to the cultural reference they were having, Brexit or sports. And you're thinking, sports, only have much more kind of, precious thing to discuss. There's much bigger communication. But I think it's just a loss of the reference of everything. Something like that.
I mean, it's interesting hearing you talk because it clearly seems to, like, so much of the Roland Barthes, and I pulled this off the shelf when you were reading. I have a whole little section up there, which I'm embarrassed to even look back at now because these are like from college, so they're like underlined and like
Right.
ridiculous little comments in here that make me feel really embarrassed. But like, why build so intimately on top of or be in such dialogue with Barthes' work? What drew you to Barthes as an influence, I guess? How do you
That's
find
really kind of long history. Maybe it's a bit unfair for the people who haven't read my other novel, especially one of the novels I wrote called A Concise Chinese English Diction for Lovers, which I wrote when I came to England 18 years ago in broken English. And that was a novel I basically tried to rewrite something based on Barthes' book, the Fragments book, but I couldn't because then I couldn't speak English. And I didn't go to any school to study English because I went to art school to learn how to make films. And this impatience of life, let me live rather than go to school. So I regret that. I wish I went to school to study English. But I said, well, let me try with my broken English. Perhaps I could continue live in the West as a writer. And I wrote that novel, but which is kind of a way, nothing to do with Barthes' work. And the book took its own kind of path and it left me alone. And after all these years, I wrote other novels and I continued to live in the Anglophone world. And then now, after more than 15 years, and I thought, oh, I remember that first attempt when I came to the West. I'm going back to write that book. Finally, I could write. Maybe I could pay some kind of debt to Barthes, and I learned so many things from, especially one of his books, Writing 0 Degree. The whole idea of construction and storytelling, the whole idea of the incredible authenticity of being an artist, it's all destroyed in that book. Of course, and before him, everyone else announced, go way back to Nietzsche, or anyone from the European philosophical tradition, from say, from Walter Benjamin, for example. What is the authenticity in the modern age? When cinema came, when camera being produced, and for me, I thought, these things I learned and read when I was in China should somehow equip me with the new thoughts, new story I had in the English world, and therefore I rewrote my first book, which is now this book after about writing several books. A Lover's Discourse, but again. Then a strange accident happened. Britain suddenly slipped into this strange war zone of Brexit. And then the novel had its own kind of anxiety about an immigrant in Britain, which somehow, has no future. It doesn't belong to this non-foreign land. No one is native apart from British in a way, after Brexit. And that became a kind of anxiety lurking around in that novel. And in that section I read, which I was going to read a little section about the boat, but I somehow didn't in the end, because the man and woman live on the little boat in the canal in London. And it's a famous canal with all the narrow boats, living boats. If you ever come to London, you see that, there's very messy, wonderful life on those boats. And I thought the canal and the boat are the symbol of the current Britain, right? It's a narrow boat. It's kind of shifting in this wave and wind, not knowing where it goes. Are we with Europe or with America, or with nobody?
That's so interesting. I love the idea of returning to a previous book and trying again. Matthew, what about you? What influences what came to play on your collection?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer because I was thinking about what you said about kind of studying English in school, right? And how you regretted not having that like formal education. Then I'm thinking, wow, like I had that formal education and then I kind of forgot everything, right? Like you study English from, I don't know, first grade through college, and then you go to grad school if you want. And it's sort of, I think growing as a writer is ditching some of those influences. I think I first got into the modernists. So I was reading a lot of like H.G. Doolittle and George Oppen and William Carlos Williams, and The Flowers of Evil from translated to English, which is never the same as the original French, which I can't read. And I think it for a number of years I wasn't reading contemporary poetry, and I think that was one thing I regretted, was for most of my 20s not really being immersed in that conversation. And it's been kind of rewarding to pick up some of those those poets who are around today and having conversation with them. So I really like this guy Matthew Lipman, who is kind enough to blur my collection, and this other poet Tom Hunley. He's amazing and just has this huge heart, but also humor. And that's something that I want to try in my poetry. I think trying to have a little more of humor and levity. And I think it's hard for me. So trying to, challenge myself in that way. But primarily to answer your question, Louis Gluck, Robert Haas, Cesar Vallejo, Sharon Olds is someone I go back to. Again, I can't say I'm familiar with all her work, but I saw her read when I was 19 and it like blew me away. And she read Ode to a Vagina. I remember that. And I was like one of the few guys in the room, right? And I'm blushing because like she's a pretty hard-hitting feminist poet. And again, that's, something I wasn't used to or hadn't really taken as an inspiration. So that's kind of what I mean when she was able to kind of twist my worldview a little bit, and inject a lot of humor and pathos at the same time, and really these these big overarching theoretical concepts, but also make them feel personal. And I've been gravitating toward her work in recent years. So
I love that poem turns you into a poet.
Right? Like I'm sitting there, I'm like, I don't know how to feel about any of this.
Like, I want to do this.
Yeah, totally.
What do you guys like? It's as we were talking, as everyone was coming in. It's some scary shit happening still. It's been months and it keeps going, and who knows what the future is going to bring. What are you guys turning to for comfort these days? Whether that's art or anything. What is it that you're turning to give yourself a little, I don't know, just get you through this club period that we're in? Who wants it?
I don't know how you are reading there, but I found myself attract more and more to nonfiction, which is perhaps getting old, or I do have certain kind of allergic reaction to a lot of contemporary fiction, say fiction after 1990s. I sort of lost kind of patience with how standard fiction develops, even with excellent language and a beautiful story and a wonderful structure. I guess I lost a certain kind of a need for the repetition of that aesthetic in that fixed form. But then, of course, many novelists argue, well, novel is the amazing form which you can be very elastic. You can call anything novel or fiction. True, but what's on the market for me, 90% of fiction on the market, it seems to be in need of production or feel the production line. And also because I'm writing fiction last few years, I felt kind of scared, the feeling, fit into that part of this superfluous, this kind of excessive kind of landscape for nothing. So I just kind of reject it in a way, At the moment I write a nonfiction book, but what fills my evenings or my night are mostly strange books, on language or nature, especially landscape, history.
That is very cool. Thank you.
I've, much to probably my fiance's disappointment, I don't read the news as much as I should. And I think part of my job as a book editor is following the news. And I find myself reading a lot of long form pieces, a lot of narrative journalism, but I try to stay away from reading about politics or the pandemic. I found that was really hard for me, especially in the early days. So I'm starting to read more news now, but for several months I was staying away from that. I've been reading a lot of classics, just things I had skipped over. I kind of made a rule of myself, like, I don't want to pick up any more books on the street unless I start reading the books on my shelf. So I'm reading, The Three Musketeers of all books is like been kind of staring me down for years, and having really a lot of fun with that. So I tend to read one novel and then one nonfiction book. I'm reading a book about the War of 1812 right now, and the Battle of New Orleans. And it's a pretty slim 200-page history, which feels doable. But yeah, I think that's what's bringing me comfort, just like going back to some of those classics that I just never even thought to read. You're kind of like surrounded by the mythology of these books and the pop culture treatment of them. But I was like, what does the Three Musketeers actually read like? And it's completely.
What is that book about?
It's about this, guy who's given a letter to join this king's troop in France, right? And like he's sort of fighting with everyone. I mean, I'm only in 20 pages in, and there's been like 2 battles already. I'm like, well, all right, let's go. So yeah, it's I remember there was this what was that challenge, Brian, that was going on this summer with reading War and Peace? Yeah. I ended up getting off Twitter, getting off social media entirely, which has been helpful for my writing. But I was doing that for a little bit, and that was kind of fun to see, just like everyone reading War and Peace together and, thinking of what it means in contemporary culture. So maybe one day I'll go back to that. But
it cracks me up though that you're like, I won't take in any more books off the street until you've read, because our neighborhood is like, the streets are like overflowing with books. There's books.
And they're good.
But
like,
it's a pandemic, so don't pick it up, please.
Exactly. Call them bug books.
Hafizah, what about you? What's bringing you comfort?
I mean, I too am kind of like gave up on the news, it's, and just like trying to distance myself from like all of the barrage of news about like Trump, the pandemic. I mean, idiocy is going to stay idiocy until we can get it out. So I don't need to stay like up to date on that. Because it turns out it's not that original every time. So, but I've been like, I would say I'm one of those people where I've been writing a shit ton of the pandemic. I've been like reading, just like a bunch. I've been rereading some stuff, especially when it's just like really hard to focus. I'm just like, when am I ever going to reread a book? I'm just like, in a global pandemic, because like, I know the story, like I could focus, but just to be able to, just reading like a book, like, like, span of a decade later even, and so, yeah, I've just been focusing on that. Like, I love pop culture. So I've just been like, just finished the full season of This Is Us. It was a heartbreaker. I don't know if you guys are watching that show, but you definitely should be if you're not, because America loves it. So yeah, it just kind of like, I think that's one of like the challenges of being in quarantine as writers, to be a writer, you really do need to be in the world, you know? And so there's so much that you just get from like, just like, you know, being on the train, which I will never be again in my life. Like, or just like conversations of things that you overhear. And so like, you know, really trying to figure out like, how do I replicate the experience of the world that I need as a writer? You know, and so it's been a lot of time at the park. Just being like, how can I still like see people being people? And, you know, I think that has been like beneficial to me because during, you know, I live next to the park, and in between the park in my apartment is the parade grounds where it's just a bunch of soccer fields and all the intramural sports. So like, even in the pandemic, like this summer, like, you know, children were still learning how to ride their bikes. You know, there was just like slews of parents teaching their kids like how to take the training wheels off. You know, there's still like quinceañeras going on, still retirement parties. And so like, I think like that has been like, I think helpful in order to be like, okay, like people are still experiencing each other. So I think that's definitely been helping to get me through.
That's very cool. Yeah, I have definitely pop culture has been saving me a little bit. I definitely, for me though, it's been like anything that has monsters in it. Like right now, currently Lovecraft Country has been doing it. Like
that show stressed me out.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I've been like, so far I'm in only like 3 episodes in, but I like I just
you're a baby in this.
Okay, all right, all right. We have something to look forward to.
Yeah. It gets weird, way weird.
I just like when the evil can be like defeated through the use of magic. It's very comforting. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you guys so much. Matthew, thank you. Hafizah, thank you. Xiaolu, thank you. So this has been so great, such a great final event of the year. So yeah, thank you to all of you guys. Thank you to a great audience for being here. Thank you, Peter, for your questions. I see a couple people joined us a little bit late. Shout out to Harmony joining us from a series regular. Harmony, this is we started an hour earlier, so you can go and catch this on YouTube and check it out from the beginning. And everybody else, thank you again, guys, so much. This will be archived on the Literary Hub's virtual book channel. Yeah, as we kick this turbulent year to the curb, I hope that all of y'all remain healthy and optimistic and that you keep reading books. So thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks all the Daddonas that came. You know, that your whole fam's here.
I know. I'm like looking at it. Wow, good representation.
Yeah.
Amazing. We'll see you guys soon.
See you guys later. Bye.
Have a good night.